In this video, we're going to talk about 10 college football teams that I don't love for 2025 in college football. It was a little over a week ago that I talked about 10 teams that I absolutely loved, and this is going to be just the flip side of that, 10 teams that I'm not crazy about right now. Now, this isn't a bottom 10. These aren't necessarily in order, but these are just teams where I don't feel as good about them as I know other people are probably feeling about them right now. Now, this can all be subject to change, so the disclaimer is that there's a lot of offseason left. I reserve the right to change my mind about any of these teams, but without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off at number 10, we have Coastal Carolina. Now, the Chanticleers are a brand and a team that I absolutely love, and following them since they've gone to the FBS has been really fun. They had some really fun iterations under Jamie Chadwell, but then Jamie Chadwell leaves. They bring in Tim Beck, and in this last season, they really tested those first couple of recruiting classes that Beck had, and they sort of folded under the pressure this last season. They really didn't perform well in conference play at all, and it was after they got a really nice win in the non-conference versus Jacksonville State. So now, a pretty critical year 3 for Tim Beck, his staff, this roster is approaching, and they're not doing anything that's setting them apart in the Sun Belt, and it just feels like they were pretty high in the pecking order there under Chadwell, and that has just sort of slipped in the last couple of seasons to where they're not the same standard they once were. So I'm not too optimistic about them returning to their status as one of the top teams in the Sun Belt this next season, and I'm feeling pretty pessimistic about them as a result. Coming in at number 9, we have North Texas. They fall into this kind of camp for kind of a different and kind of a similar reason. It has to do with a change in head coach that occurred 2 seasons ago, just like Tim Beck. But in this case, North Texas went ahead and fired their head coach, Seth Littrell, fresh off of a conference title game appearance where, yeah, they did lose and then they went on to lose the bowl game, but it felt like it was a little bit of an overreaction to them not hitting the lofty goals that they had for this team and this program. In his place comes Eric Morris, who was the guy they thought could take them to the next level, and through 2 seasons, it's been clear that hasn't been the case. In fact, they were one of the worst bowl teams we saw this season, beating up on a bunch of inferior opponents on their schedule and just slipping into a bowl game. Anyone with a pulse that they played this season took care of them pretty handily. So for North Texas heading into year 3 under Eric Morris, you're going to need to see some serious signs of improvement to trust him as a head coach. And to me, it just strikes the exact same tone as the Tim Beck situation at Coastal Carolina, where I'm not optimistic about it, and there's no reason in the first couple of seasons for me to be optimistic about it, because in both cases, the coaches stepped into a great situation with the program, and they just haven't navigated it very effectively in their early going. Coming in at number 8, we have the Indiana Hoosiers. Now, Indiana was one of the best stories in college football this last season. They obviously get off to the amazing start they did. They're undefeated. They run into Ohio State, and their only losses, when you look at it at the end of the season, were to Notre Dame and Ohio State, the 2 teams in the national title game. So they were a pretty dang good team. But it's the way this team was built and what happened to them this offseason that makes me not as confident that they're going to be able to replicate what happened this season. First off, their schedule gets tougher. Secondly, they lost 13 starters to graduation this last season. A lot of the players they brought in from the portal to help this team were upperclassmen. So it wasn't like they were stacking with young talent like a team like Arizona State, where you're really confident about what will happen this season. No, a lot of those guys have already moved on, meaning you've got to go get more guys out of the portal or more guys that can step up from your recruiting classes, and in which case you're going to end up with a little bit more volatility. It's not a sure thing that Indiana is just going to be this well-oiled machine again this season. You can still trust Curt Cignetti as a head coach. You can still think they're going to have a good season. I think they will, but I'm just a little bit more pessimistic about what they might be able to achieve. I don't think it's going to be just a linear rebuild under Cignetti. Year 1 was fantastic. I think year 2 can still be really good without being the same level of incredible that it was last season. Coming in at number 7, we have UCLA. Now, UCLA is a team that's had me a little bit conflicted because when they made the hire of Deshaun Foster at head coach, I really hated it at the time, and I thought, this UCLA team had enough talent to maybe win some games, but they had to hire the right guy, and hiring Foster I didn't think was the right move. In hiring Deshaun Foster, they were able to keep some of these guys on the roster to run it back for the next season. They still end up struggling in Big Ten play. They look pretty bad in the early going, but then they go on a nice winning streak toward the end of the season and just miss out on a bowl game at 5-7. So there was something there, but I still hold to my original opinion of Deshaun Foster, which is I don't understand the hire a whole lot. I don't think it makes sense through a long-term lens, and it really felt like he was the locker room hire, the hire that the guys liked in the locker room, but now that we've seen them go out and play, that's a 5-7 locker room, and it could get worse from there. And so, yes, it's a locker room hire, and that's good for if you have a bunch of super talented players. UCLA just didn't quite have that, and I think that showed between the white lines, and I have a feeling that the Bruins could end up regretting this hire as we see more seasons start to settle in of the Deshaun Foster era. Coming in at number 6, we have Virginia Tech. Now, the Hokies had a ton of things going for them this last season. They had the return of Bashuel Tutin and Kyron Drones at quarterback and running back, They had 86% of their returning production from the season prior, and all of those key players, and people were expecting them to not just be a sleeper in the ACC, but a straight-up contender. We get to this season, and it just wasn't that. They lose to Vandy in overtime to open the season. They have several losses down the stretch that just left you scratching your head and wondering, how did Virginia Tech find a way to lose that? And it's a similar situation where that was Brent Pry's kind of signature year where they were thinking he was going to put it all together, and it didn't happen. And so now you're left with a little bit more uncertainty than you would have hoped to have in this season, which I believe is his 4th season now with Virginia Tech. You like the fact that he was able to make a bowl game the last couple of years, but it's just the fact that they were such high expectations. Everything was going their way, including returning production, including a pretty friendly schedule, all that stuff, and it didn't happen. And so now in this year, they're not returning as much production. They're not returning a lot of those things. Are they going to be able to navigate and have another successful season? I just don't think we've seen enough from Pry at this point to be confident in him, and as a result, I'm not as confident in this team. Coming in at number 5, we have Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M is a team where it is pretty much a cardinal sin to go against them in the offseason, because in the offseason, you're wrong if you don't think they're going to be an amazing team. You're wrong if you don't think they can be a national title contender, and it's because Texas A&M has had a top 10 roster in college football virtually every season for like the last 7 years. It's been ridiculous how good they've been at acquiring talent in the form of star players. And yet, season after season, we see Texas A&M flop in critical games, fail to get 8-9 wins in a season. This last season, they were in a position to make the SEC title game, a golden position, and they end up just completely folding down the stretch and finishing at 8-5. It felt a little bit Jimbo-esque on the first season of the new regime there with Mike Elko. I like the way Mike Elko's built this team. I like the way he's built his staff, but it was kind of not what you had hoped for in the first season. And yes, I'm aware this is a really talented team, and yes, it's unfair to truly try to judge Mike Elko too hard for his first season at Texas A&M, but clearly things did not go according to plan, especially at the tail end of the season, and I'm not sure if I feel confident that a lot of those things are going to get fixed in just year 2. I think this could end up being a much longer project, because at Texas A&M, it's not about finding talent. There's plenty of talent. It's about filtering out the right talent for this system and for this team, and it might take some time for them to do that, and so we'll see if that happens for the Aggies this season. I'm leaning towards it probably taking at least another year. Coming in at number 4, we have NC State. Now, the Wolfpack were another team where people looked at this season and they said, wow, the Wolfpack may be more equipped to be a contender in the ACC this year than they ever have been under Dave Doran, who's been there a long time. And then the actual end result and the actual product for NC State was really ugly. Man, they just scraped by against some bad teams, and they're very fortunate to have even made a bowl game. And some of that had to do with poor injury luck. Some of it had to do with some of their big portal additions just straight up not working. But it was clear this last season, NC State aggressively pursued through the portal and tried to circle that as their year. Didn't work at all, and now I'm just concerned going forward about what that means for this team. It's a very strong culture-driven team under Dave Doran. It always has been that way. If that culture and that core is shaken, how are they going to respond the next season? Is it going to be a fantastic bounce-back season, or is NC State going to find themselves in a difficult position? Because what's happening is if you have another negative season under Dave Doran, do you start to question your longtime head coach? It's something we're seeing a lot of programs facing right now with guys that have been there for a long time. Now at Wake Forest, with Dave Clawson, who was there a similar amount of time, he ended up resigning after 2 or 3 bad seasons. So we'll see if something similar might happen to Dave Doran, especially as we try to transition into a new era of college football. Stuff like that happens all the time. Some of the coaches just do not make it through the cracks to the new era. Coming in at number 3, we have Fresno State. The Bulldogs were a team that underwent some strife last offseason when Jeff Tedford at the last minute basically announced he was going to be resigning due to health reasons, which was very unfortunate to see. They end up having to just right the ship without him, and they don't do it. They're not able to do it. They consistently were inconsistent. That was the only thing that was consistent about them all season. And this season, they bring in Matt Entz to be their new head coach. He was just the linebackers coach at USC, but more notably before that, he was the head coach at North Dakota State, where he won some national titles and then controversially left to become the linebackers coach at USC. And so my question and my concern comes with Matt Entz himself, simply because I'm aware he won a lot of games at North Dakota State, but a lot of coaches have done that. And North Dakota State was actually on kind of a downward turn when he left to USC, and now they just won a title with a new head coach. And so I question whether or not Entz is what he is advertised at. And it's a big swing, and I respect Fresno State for taking it, especially as they start to pave their way into the Pac-12 in 2026, but I'm just doubting it for this season. Coming in at number 2, we have UCF, who's on this list because of the same reason a lot of other teams are on this list, because of the head coach situation. For UCF this offseason, they essentially decided to get back with their ex, which is Scott Frost, who was formerly the head coach of UCF back when they were in the American Conference. He led them to an NCAA-recognized national title and some of the best seasons they've ever had in school history. It was a very impressive run. He then leaves for Nebraska, where we watched him just absolutely crash and burn down the stretch, just never even sniff a bowl game, have some really talented teams that just could not win games, and that was the last we saw him as a head coach. He gets fired, and now he's back at UCF. And so people are asking, what's it going to be? Are we going to see him capture the same magic he had in the American Conference, or will he look more like he did at Nebraska? And I'm right now leaning more toward the Nebraska theory, because this is the Big 12. UCF can't just ride their way to 10 games easily like they were able to in the American because they're just recruiting and have better talent than everyone else. It's not the case here, and we've seen across the board virtually with these teams that are joining the new conference from the American Conference, it's tough. Cincinnati with Scott Satterfield, I mean, they haven't been back to a bowl game since they left the American Conference. Houston hasn't been back to a bowl game since they left the American Conference. So it's tough sledding out there in the Big 12, and I'm not sure if Scott Frost has the chops to get and make it happen. Coming in at number 1, we have Pitt. Now, Pitt has been a team that's kind of been a hot button team in the ACC because they go out, they win an ACC title. The subsequent season, they have a very successful year still. Pat Narduzzi's got this team operating at an all-time high, but then comes the season in 2023 where it was just a flop. They go 3-9. It was a disaster. Everything went wrong, so he shakes up the staff. He brings in a new OC in Cade Bell. He hopes he can turn things around, and he does. They get off to a 7-0 start. They've got Eli Holstein, who's their quarterback of the future. Things are looking fantastic. The Narduzzi defense is showing up, and then the next 6 games happens, and Eli Holstein gets injured, and Pitt loses 6 games. And Pitt just says, well, as long as we have Holstein back, we'll be okay. But I really think when you start to actually look at the context of that opening run, there's a lot of close wins in there. There's a lot of unlikely wins in there. And I feel like now we're dealing with a Pitt season that sort of gives the false impression that everything was clicking at the start of the season, when there were actually some terminal flaws in this team that simply got exposed later. Now, having Eli Holstein, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce it, so that's for the inconsistency. Sorry about that. Having him back may remedy some of those issues, but what happens when it doesn't? And that's what I'm concerned about for Pitt. I've been concerned about the direction this program's been headed in for the last couple of seasons. To me, Pat Narduzzi is one of those cases of a coach where you can sort of tell the game is starting to pass him by. He just maybe hasn't noticed it yet. And so for that reason, you're not going to catch me going out on a limb for Pitt football this season. I'm not loving them in 2025. That's all I got for this video. Those are the 10 teams I am not loving in 2025. Let me know down in the comments what teams you maybe aren't as high on in 2025 as you've noticed some other people are. And let me know down in the comments some other off-season video ideas that you think I should do. I'm open to whatever. It's a long off-season. Going to continue to get great content out to you guys, though. That's all I got for today, and I will see you guys later this week.